Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest episode of Good Trouble, the series where I engage in above-the-table conversations that I feel are necessary in the board gaming space in a spirit of education and compassion. So, as I like to do here on Shelf Stories, longtime watchers at this point are familiar with my practice of deepening the conversations whenever I put up a think piece. In this particular case, it was a think piece on cultural appreciation versus appropriation, and it generated a whole ton of discussion. I was a little bit surprised that the topic seemed to resonate so much with people. Lots of comments, questions, curiosity. I really love when people are curious about the ideas. Criticisms, that's welcome too, as long as you're engaging in good faith about the distinction between these two things. We want to appreciate cultures, right? We're board gamers. We love games about, cities and cultures and history, Euro games, war games. We're always playing in the sandbox of, history and people's interacting in the present day. Wanted to evoke those real life exchanges and experiences in our games. It makes our gaming life richer. And so there's a large element of appreciation going on. So the question is, where's that line? All right, where's the line between appropriation and appropriation? When am I doing this appropriation thing? Does appropriation even exist? And how do we talk about it? How do we think about it? So many good perspectives. Discussion is the name of the game here on Shelf Stories. The games we play, they're not just toys on the table. They are genuine manifestations of culture, of creativity, of, people put their lives, their hearts, and, a lot of ideas go into these games. And my channel, a listener called it a salon, so I'll go with that. A salon to explore deeper level critical thinking about the games in our table. Try to do so, without attacking anybody and trying to be as constructive as possible. So if you support that or what I am trying to do here on Shelf Stories, the best way you can do so is like the video, subscribe to the channel. Every like and every subscription, raises the profile. Share it out, retweet, get conversations going. That is the best way to get the word out and support me. I really appreciate it. I won't run ads. I will not monetize Shelf Stories. I don't want just an ad just kind of jutting into the middle of an idea and it going on. That's not something that I'm comfortable with. I don't want a Patreon either. I want this to be as much about just the discussion in the community as possible. So if you support Shelf Stories, please, you can help me the best by spreading the word. So I'd like to get started in as positive a way as I possibly can. I love multiculturalism. The point of Shelf Stories in general and Good Trouble in particular, and also the last video in this video, is to encourage cultural appreciation. That is my paradigm. I want us to appreciate culture as much as possible. I would like to promote the free exchange of ideas, of cultural forms. I learn from you, you learn from me. We all learn from each other. White, black, brown, Asian, red, the different cultures within those categories. It's all good. I can't stress enough how much a part of the very fiber of my being it is to be a multicultural person. The reason I'm making that point is because it's very easy to get in this conversation and get, it doesn't go well. There's a lot of friction there. There's a lot of uncharitable misinterpretation. What are you really saying? That kind of thing. And I wanted to mitigate that. Not that you'll ever get rid of it, where these conversations are too tough, but at least to offer in a very clear way what the point is. Multiculturalism, all of us getting together and all of us exchanging freely, which is the drill down point of the video. So I wanted to run through a couple of comments that kind of pick at that and are seeking clarity. So a lot of the comments are coming from BGG. There was a thread in the Marrakesh game folder, whatever those are called, the game page. And I would like to thank Robin from the One Stop Co-op Shop Discord for posting my video and getting discussion going. Thank you very much to the moderators for keeping discussion generally in line. Especially though, thank you to everybody who contributed, whether you backed me up or disagreed. It's all good as long as discussion happens. I'm good. All right. So this is a critical point talking about how do we deal with the divisions? Do we throw up walls? And I like the way this commenter put the point. Quote, I understand what others are saying about how overstressing the usage of cultural artifacts in games art as cultural appropriation might be problematic. To add to Giannis's point, previous post, my fear is that going overboard would lead to cultural nationalism, we all draw very clearly defined boundaries around each of our own cultures, resulting in ethno-nationalism and divisions between people and cultures. I have seen this in my part of the world. Very good point. We need to be very careful of that, and I'm really against that. I want to try to tear down the walls and make as much interchange as possible. So how do you square a discussion about appropriation and problematizing the act of appropriation from a desire to, establish a community that shares freely? Great, So I'm going to hit that point bit by bit. I'm going to introduce a few ideas a little bit later in the video. I wanted to start, though, by sharing my personal beliefs. I want to be felt. I want to be heard, too. But, this is a thing that I feel. And I like to share that feeling of multiculturalism as much as possible by sharing some of my life experience very, very quickly. Okay. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, one of the most multicultural areas in the world. I grew up in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, which at the time was had a Puerto Rican community. Lots of Latin Americans, as I grew up, from Mexico, Central America, came in, so learning different things right there. Lots of different white communities, Polish and Scandinavian and Italian and Russian. Later on, a lot of Asians came into my neighborhood, and a short bike ride away were Arabic neighborhoods, a lot of them from Lebanon and Palestine, and also Jewish communities, which are very long-standing in Brooklyn. So within a couple of miles bike ride was any culture that I wanted to interact with and to learn from. And that's been, in my life, playing with kids who are part of that culture the entire time. I've always loved it. And then I went to college and I majored in world religions, and I took the opportunity to travel. What better way to learn world religions than to travel to the individual countries and learn how they engage in spiritual practice. And while I was around, I got a chance to meet a lot of different people. And, I'm a brown person. Thanks to the kind of hue of my skin, it became kind of a familiar thing to, meet up with different people and resonate a little bit. I never denied that I was Puerto Rican, but, you go around these countries, they don't know what a Puerto Rican is. So, had a little bit of fun kind of instantiating myself into these cultures. Spent some time in New Zealand. Interacting with folks from the Maori community. Here is my Maori mom, as we like to joke back and forth in a very, very good-natured way. I spent some time in Nicaragua with a host family. In China, was able to study with some university students who were very gracious, volunteered their time to help our student group, become a part of the culture and navigate a little bit. And relevant to this discussion, there were other places where I took on the dress. I was in India and wearing my kurta pajama. And this was actually for a cultural celebration in which I was there. They taught me Indian dance. It was kind of this modern Bollywood thing. And I wasn't that great, but it was a lot of fun. And it was, I felt very kind of instantiated in the culture, and a lot of kind of rich interchange and learning happened during my experiences. I spent the most time in Nepal. I feel like I got the most immersed, as much as a Westerner can, in Nepali culture. They even gave me a name, Jivan. They called me Jivan Dai. Jivan means life. Dai means older brother. So I was Jivan Dai. So to this day, if anybody that I met on that Nepal trip does not know me as Jason, they know me as Jivan. And here I am with a Buddhist monk outfit. I was, there for 2 months, and for, a weekend, I was in a Buddhist monastery, trying to, discover spiritual things, whatever you do at a Buddhist monastery. Point being that I have been thinking about these kinds of cultural interchanges the entire time. Thinking about, the idea of being a cultural tourist. Am I, is this too silly? Am I taking the culture seriously? I made a lot of mistakes and stepped over a lot of bounds. I was, young, 20 years old, college kid, a lot of overstepping, a lot of overenthusiasm. But I think that's part of the process. I was so enthusiastic about the culture. I was willing to kind of go in and make those mistakes and think about, what are the boundaries, where is the respectful line and where is it, not so respectful. That is what multiculturalism is. It's hard and it takes a lot of thinking. So I'm offering that as context to help folks understand my thinking, my worldview, and how I approached the subject of the last video, which is Stefan Feld, European game designer, donning a jalaba and fez, and using that as part of his Kickstarter campaign for Marrakesh and the city collection in general. And I think there was a tendency, to see that as, oh, well, I'm offended and it's about my feelings, and, kind of an instinctual read on why I had an issue. And on that particular case, nothing could be further from the truth, because I get it. I get, going to different countries, you want to be able to, instantiate yourself in the culture as much as possible. I mean, every single time that I remember these, these experiences, it makes me happy because, making real connections with people and learning and growing and all that good stuff. And, if I wasn't boring here in Hartford, Connecticut, wife, kids, job, and responsibilities, I would be going to more cultures and immerse myself there, all the different, foods and cultural forms. I love it. It's very few things that are more fun for me. And so that really begs a giant question. What is the difference? Why is one form okay and another form not so okay? I know it's tough, and I've said that a couple times in the videos. So here's my way forward. Here's why I think that there's a difference. The image from the Marrakesh project is an advertisement. And I want to be a little bit careful here because I think we're not quite used to, separating that stuff. I think, a lot of people think of that as kind of a piece, like, cultural stuff and, eating, drinking, whatever, and the buying and the selling. That's all human activity. It's all thought of as one thing, very natural. Everybody's, bought and sold throughout history, right? What separates it from me is that cultural stuff is kind of limitless. Like, knowledge is limitless, and, dancing, that's all, as long as human beings are doing stuff, you can just do that freely. When it comes to buying and selling, now we're talking about a limited resource, attention. Ask any game producer, designer, publisher, a Kickstarter creator, what is the one thing they're looking for when it comes to launching their campaigns? Attention. Breaking through the people's focus on all these different things is all this stuff, the social medias and just regular medias, filling our attention with stuff and penetrating that wall and getting someone's attention to the point where they're going to look at your project and make a decision whether they're going to buy it or not. That's difficult. And so one of the things that especially when you're using these city games, the part of the whole point of using city games is to get people's attention with something familiar. And so the particular thing here, aside from the city name, being Middle Eastern garb broadly understood, and Stefan Feld himself, who is a brand among certain circles at this point. And I want to be really careful. I don't mean that as a shade or a slight. He seems like a really lovely guy, would never intend any harm towards any person or culture. As far as, the posters that I read, no. And, seems has an excellent reputation as a designer. Not seems, it does have an excellent reputation. So, this is not shade towards anybody, no, not Mr. Feld, no Queen Games. The opposite. It is an invitation to discuss, taking the person out of it. I want to focus on the practice, the thing, the image that we saw. And in some ways that, the having a city name and a lot of these Euro games that just kind of borrow city names from all over the place. I truly feel that the proper way to understand these images is appropriative, not appreciative. Appropriative, that doesn't say it's wrong. I know that's where people go. It's like, okay, well, you're saying you're wrong and he's not doing anything wrong. It generates issues. There's a gray area here that I want to talk about. The gray area being that attention is a limited resource. And I would like to truly question where the benefits of that attention, the attention itself, and also the things gained from it, which is sales, money, cash money, where is that all going? To a white European design company, etc. And I know people have those counter arguments. It's like, well, the city's benefiting as well, or is it so bad to make a profit off of something? Blah 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 blah. I will go through all of those, those counter arguments in just a second. I do want to drill down on the point that this is a analysis of the thing itself, not of people. That's the fundamental tenet of shelf stories. The fundamental of multiculturalism is to try to talk about practices and, try to treasure people as much as possible, give as much benefit of the doubt as possible, and analyze practice. Yes, it's a difficult word, appropriation. It doesn't have to be scary or interpreted as an attack. It's a practice, and we can check out of that practice if we want. As a matter of fact, I've dealt with the issues around there. When I came back, this was 2000, from my trips, and I was sharing my pictures with the staff by my college, Brooklyn College. There were people that said, what, we should show up to some of these donor meetings and these functions and everything, dressed up in the garb, and tell people how much of a great time you had, how much Brooklyn College benefited you and helped you plug into all these resources, and how if they donated money, then more perhaps the Brooklyn College will be able to help more students do the same. It's kind of a selling point because it's unique, my experience. And I thought about it. I'm like, I don't feel comfortable with that. That feels more proper to my private space, and just kind of thinking through, I think I kind of made the right decision. And, just moving forward, let's say this is hypothetical, not been asked for this, but hypothetically, if I were to get hired by Floodgate Games, and I were to get put in my kurta pajama and sell their game Holi, a festival of colors, which is based on the eponymous Hindu festival, throwing the powder into, I think it's like bowls or something like that. It's a really, really fun game, very, very colorful, based on the festival. How would it go if I showed up at the booth in the kurta pajama with my saying my name was Jai Singh, which was my Hindi name, or Jivan, which was my Nepali name? How would that go? At least without, explicit, welcoming and sanction from somebody in the Indian community who is much more attached than, I or anybody at Floodgate Games would go. What if it was just detached from all that stuff? How would that go? That practice, I think that would be appropriative. So I wouldn't do it. And so that is the kind of thing reflection that I want to invite, reflection about the practice, not the person. And so that's how I think about the distinction between appropriation and appreciation, cultural appreciation, mutual sharing of ideas, acknowledgement of each other's cultural forms, free exchange, and also respect baked into the exchange on both sides. An appropriation is a one-way taking of a thing where one side has disproportional benefits of some kind of limited resource like money or attention or that kind of thing. We go on. So I noticed a number of different interesting threads. I'd like to pursue two of them in terms of the reaction to the last video here for the rest of this follow-up. I'm going to get this point from St. Salieri on the BGG thread. This particular post got way more likes than anybody else on the thread. So I imagine a lot of people at BGG feel the same way. So I'm happy to acknowledge and respond. So it drills down on the idea of harm, that a appropriation implies some kind of active harm being done, and trying to figure out where the harm is. Quote, if a member of a colonizing society portrays a member of a colonized or formerly colonized society as exhibiting uniformly negative traits or lacking virtues like intelligence, honesty, work ethic, etc., that would be an appropriation. I think that is the sentence, the sense of the sentence. Okay. These representations are extremely common throughout history and up to the present. Halloween costumes, like those you mentioned, are harmful in as much as they engage in this practice. But there's nothing disparaging about Feld portraying himself as a tourist in Morocco, and I'm not sure what it could possibly say about Moroccans at all, except that they have a cool country to visit. Harmful stereotypes generate harm. If this is a stereotype or not, this is it's a tourist enjoying a thing. Anyone who has gone and traveling and spent appreciable amount of times in anywhere is likely going to adopt some kind of dress or cultural form and have those pictures. What is the harm? Nothing negative is being portrayed. It could have been. There's lots of stereotypes to choose from. Every marginalized group has some kind of stereotype that is attached to them. And when it comes to the Arabic world or the Muslim world, there is no lack of negative stereotypes in the European American context. None of these apply here. So what is the problem? My response is that I think we need to broaden how we think about stereotypes. So stereotypes can be negative, or they can be positive, or they can be neutral. A stereotype is a widely held, fixed, and oversimplified image of a thing. There's no value judgment inherent in that basic definition of what a stereotype is. The issue with the appropriation, and the reason why we're drilling down on appropriation, is that something doesn't have to be negative to be appropriated. That doesn't make any sense, actually. If you're going to appropriate something, you're going to appropriate something that's either neutral or good, because the purpose of an appropriation isn't necessarily to oppress or to hate or to harm. It's to extract value and sell for my benefit. That is what an appropriation is, and that's what makes it distinct from a active harm done to the whatever the source culture is. In another context, we would call it commodifying, where we take a thing, anything, we flatten it, we co-opt it to make it appealing to the intended audience, and sell and get the profit. It's like like processing a burger or processing you take a thing that is not really sellable, you make it, you create conditions so that you can, make it into a controllable thing, and there you go, sell it. So that can happen with cultures too. I am taking the cultural forms that exist in a real living context, the organic and dynamic context, and I'm flattening them. I'm removing the human element, that messy human element that can just kind of, make people think and do all this uncomfortable stuff. And that's not what we want when we're profiting now, is it? We're flattening it, and then we co-opt it. We make it appealing to, in this case, a European American market, mostly white or fair skinned, however you want to say that, that is used to, things looking or, seeming a certain way. And there you go, profit. In this particular case, there is a cultural practice where Moroccans wear jalabas and fez. We're going to flatten and take the historical and the human and the cultural context out of it and just make it about the thing. We are going to co-opt it and make it an image that resonates with the intended audience, and then we're going to sell it. So I've explained this process of cultural appropriation, this idea that you're taking and flattening and co-opting and selling. I still haven't explained the harm. Because there's an easy counter argument to that. Human beings have to oversimplify in many, many cases. We're limited. Well, we cannot behold the complexity and fullness of every person, place, or thing that we encounter. So just to get by, we have to, engage in this kind of practice. And every single human being does it in the world. There's nothing wrong with that. And even board games. I think of board games in some ways as engines of oversimplification. A board game designer once said something like, we don't choose among simple and complex tropes. We choose from among simple tropes. I'm cool with that. My issue is when those tropes are cultural stereotypes. The reason my brain kind of tingles when I, think about this stuff is because, as a psychotherapist, I, understand a little bit about the psychology of how this stuff works. Stereotypes, whether good, bad, or indifferent or whatever, they play this outsized role, and we call it anchoring bias. So when we process new information, we're not tabula rasas. We're not just, open-minded people that are just open to whatever comes along. It's so much easier for the brain to compare it to what we know before. And what we know before is that anchor. That's what we call the anchor. Or in marketing, we call it branding. Like you're literally branded with an idea. And then when something new comes in, it has to kind of, it isn't going to counter something clean. It has to interact with the brand somehow. So then in this cultural context, you have Euro-American center, and, they have their own cultural forms, and, within the bubble, there's room for complexity and all that kind of thing. Outside of that bubble is a series of anchors. Indians are this. Chinese are this. Japanese are this. Latin America is this. It's, the further you get from the center, the more likely there will be simplified, stereotyped images that are fused to each individual anchor. Where that creates difficulty is, I think to see it the best, that you'd have to place yourself in the shoes of somebody on the outside coming in, especially from a marginalized community coming in. So that person is coming in, they want, like anybody, they want to be understood. And it isn't as easy as just explaining, who they are, where they're from. It's almost like they have to dislodge one of those anchors first in order to be fully understood. If I'm from a place in North Africa, that anchor has to, all, these people wear traditional garb and all they're nomads, they're carrying camels. And when you have a product that instantiates that very stereotype, and it's not just that product, it's multiple products. I mean, the stereotypes don't arise from one instance, it's a whole process. Then it just creates this friction, creates a barrier so that when people are from an area and they don't conform totally to the stereotypes, which is basically everybody who conforms to a total stereotype, you just encounter that frictional process, which, depending on how it goes, can be kind of discouraging and exhausting. At the end of the day, you're asking about harm. The harm is that the person might not feel as welcoming depending on what part of the system they encounter and how hard it is to dislodge that anchor and help themselves be seen. As gamers, we understand this intimately. When we go to family functions or when we talk about, just kind of interrelating with our friends who may not be gamers, and then we mention it, okay, hey, I'm a gamer. All sorts of stuff can get triggered, right? I mean, at the best of it, we might hear, oh, like Monopoly? And then there's like, okay. And it could get worse, right? Oh, you're a gamer. That means you're like, some kind of overgrown adolescent. You're living in your mom's basement. All this stereotypes, right? And they may be good-natured. We love our families and we want to be part of them. But when you're constantly faced with that stereotype, here I am, I'm presenting myself, I want to share something, but then there's a thing in the way. They're everybody else's anchors. And you get that sense of like, in order to be seen, I have to dislodge something. I have to help people unlearn something. It's not harmful in like the actual physical harmful way. It's not, this devastating violent act, but it is exhausting. We know that as gamers, and we make that decision. Are we going to talk about our stuff, or are we just going to keep it to ourselves? Or are we not just going to show up to the place at all? And so transport that to somebody coming into, the gamer space, and they have to make that decision. And, when you're in a marginalized community, you're always making that decision. How much do I share? How much do I have to, put in the work of dislodging people's anchors in order to even be understood at a basic level? It's exhausting. If we're going to call ourselves a multicultural space, I think it's worth looking at our media, looking at our products, looking at how much our products reinforce stereotypes so that, if we could reduce it, we may be able to create more avenues in. Less anchors equals more avenues in. That's what I'm kind of recommending overall. So that's one aspect to it. There's another level when it comes to games and designers of those games. People who have these newer products, from their culture that they've done, and they want to share it with the larger culture. It's not as simple as, well, let's just like everybody, toss it in and we can compete. It's that anchoring bias again. So, let's say, that person comes with their culturally instantiated game. They're coming into a field where every single, area in the world has been represented with a game. Thank you, Euro games. It's almost like, you got there first. It's like the ideas that, presented in these cultures are like the Euro games or whatever other types of games have pole position. They've established the anchors. And so the reason that's important from a designer and selling perspective, someone trying to come in and bring new products, is because stereotypes demand attention. What did I say about attention? It is the most precious resource of all. It is a fact that a good or even a mediocre product that leans into a stereotype, that appeals to the basic area, so Euro-American gamers, that product will just naturally get more attention than even a great product that doesn't trigger those stereotypes and those anchors so easily. You often hear a lot, a POC has to work twice as hard to get half as far. This is why. In this central community where there's a lot of, ideas that are instantiated, we're coming up against people's stereotypes, people's anchors, people's ideas, and to know that we have to dislodge ideas and reorient ideas just to get attention, that is a very high barrier for new ideas, new experiences to come in. And is the board gaming community totally closed? Is it a xenophobic thing? Absolutely not. But it does trade pretty frequently in these cultural stereotypes. And so very quickly getting back to the Marrakesh image in the context of this discussion of stereotypes, all four of these are actually stereotypes. I recognize the New York stereotype, 1920s Great Gatsby. I mentioned that in the last video. And I'm going to thank a lot of YouTube commenters who pointed this out to me, helped me formulate my thought. 3 of these are high class stereotypes, which are, pretty good. The Marrakesh image is a lower class stereotype. It evokes desert nomad trader as opposed to vibrant modern city, which is what Marrakesh actually is. Whether you agree or disagree that this is bad or not, I want to get out of that framework of bad and talk about just, how stereotypes work. So does this image inspire curiosity? Does it inspire openness and learning and receptivity for people who are coming in the hobby? Or does it just reinforce the same old anchors? So that's one dimension. The other dimension I want to talk about really comes out, I think, in the American context. And I own that. I'm an American as much. I want Puerto Rico too. So I have my criticism of America. But in this particular case, we talk about race a lot. And, I think there's this idea amongst folks in the, other parts of the world that we're exporting division in the way we think. We're exporting all this race talk and everything. We were all just got along before. And now the Americans, coming with their oversensitivity to these cultural things. Bruno Fiduti came into my comments. Thank you very much for coming in and chiming in. Appreciated that. Sharing a story of young girls on TikTok. I don't know when this happened, but I'll take his word for it. But they were dressed in Japanese kimonos and having fun, taking all the pictures and everything. And you had, members of the progressive wing going, "Oh, that's cultural appropriation. How could you be so disrespectful to traditional Japanese guards?" Blah blah blah. Right? And there was a big kerfuffle. Online version of a kerfuffle. And then, it gets exported to Japan, and the Japanese people have no freaking clue what they're talking about. It's fun in that thing. That dress is not understood nearly as, or in the same ways as American seemingly would understand dress. They thought that it was fun, and they were thinking that the people that were calling the pointing the finger, those are the racists, right? And they kind of had to be explained what was going on. There's that idea that, it's a taste thing, that the American taste is towards oversensitivity, seeing race and everything, blah, blah, blah. That in and of itself, honestly, is a pretty harmful stereotype of Americans. Because it, again, as I said earlier in the video, reduces the issue to feelings. And reduces the issues to sensibility and cultural ideas and all that kind of stuff. There is a much deeper level of harm that is coming from the appropriative history that we have. America was founded as a multicultural society, but the multiculturalism was highly hierarchical and appropriative and extractive from the very beginning. So, to underscore the point, let me borrow from a speech that was given by the African-American actor Jesse Williams a couple of years ago at an award acceptance ceremony. Had a lot of things to say about social justice, had this to say about appropriation.
We've been floating this country on credit for centuries, and we're done watching and waiting while this invention called whiteness uses and abuses us, burying black people out of sight and out of mind while extracting our culture, our dollars, our entertainment like oil, black gold, ghettoizing and demeaning our creations, then stealing them, gentrifying our genius, and then trying us on like costumes before discarding our bodies like rinds of strange fruit.
Black gold, brown gold, yellow gold, red gold. The history of the Americas is unfortunately baked in with actual material deprivation, one of the mechanisms of which is appropriation. So this isn't a whole history lesson on racism in America, but I wanted to underscore the point why we take, or at least those of us who are progressive or history conscious or racially conscious, are much more attuned to this issue than maybe would make sense in another context. So it goes back to the very beginning of the beginning of the New World. So, Columbus, 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, comes along and meets an island full of very friendly Native Americans called Indians, the Taino people. And according to all the reports, they were received warmly. They were offered food. They were, considered, covered men, possible deities, and worshipped and everything. And just it went really well at the very, very beginning, and then things went poorly from there. But that initial oppression created a stereotype. That stereotype was employed as advertisement to induce people from the old world to come over to the new. Come down here, come to eternal summer, beautiful, open, tropical land where, everything is free and life is easy if you can make it, kind of carve yourself out a little place. The natives are warm and welcoming. The men will bring you food and serve your needs, and the women will also serve your needs, if you know what I mean. And that was used as an inducement to get folks who did not ordinarily want to leave their lives, but they were hard up, so here we come. At the very beginning, an advertisement playing on a good, quote unquote, stereotype, a stereotype that would eventually come to be known as the noble savage. And are we going to say that the noble savage is a good thing in our world? No. Used to appropriate wealth. I don't have to tell that story. Is that too scary? Am I comparing apples and oranges? How am I comparing Marrakesh, a game, to a practice that was used to dispossess Indians from their lands? We see the spectrum. We don't see these things as distinct. We see there's a spectrum of this stuff, and there's the layers of appropriation, the layers of, okay, I'm going to take stuff from you and commodify it and sell it. That is a trace that just it gets at us. It's repeated itself in all sorts of cultural forms, movies, books, TV shows. White and, European looking folks adopting foreign garb, cosplaying, it's basically the entire cultural history, or in the cultural history of these appropriative threads, and, the death by a million cuts. You can look at one thing and say, okay, that's not related, but you look at the added boom, 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 then you understand where the hypersensitivity and the trauma comes from, really. And let me drive home the point with one more example. I thought this one was really fun. One that I remember from my living memory, twerking. Twerking being the dance move that involves your rear end, then there's no way in heck that I'm going to try to demonstrate it. Go ahead and Google a nice little GIF of what a twerk is. You'll get plenty of idea in just a couple of seconds. So then it is actually a really seriously instantiated form of African dance, a move in that culture, which came over from the African diaspora, in the West Indies, and eventually kind of emerges in Louisiana, in the South, Mississippi, etc., in America. So then you have artists, African American, Caribbean American. Big Frida was a big person in terms of influencing and spreading the word about this. I think that they have some kind of world record twerk, which I don't even know what that means. Did they twerk the longest for the longest amount of time? I'm not sure. Anyway, so that is a whole cultural thing. So then what happens? You have, people who are looking for cultural forms. They see this and they just reduce it down to the image. We don't want the person. We want the image. Or we want the move. And let's co-opt the move to something that will be more broadly appealing to a broader mainstream American audience. And we are going to get attention for it. We're going to get, fame and notoriety. And, this is Miley Cyrus. And that was, her doing it at a recent, award show caused a lot of attention. And again, as I've articulated many, many times, attention is a limited resource. Now you have a lot of people who are associating twerking with, Miley Cyrus, who's white, and what do African Americans get where the original form was from? And you could say, what's the harm? Now you have people who are doing twerking classes. And who's teaching the classes and who's charging money for the classes? And is that money going towards the communities from which they originated? Is there even acknowledgement given? Is there credit given for this cultural form of dance? It's hard once it gets into the mind share of, the peoples. It's hard to kind of reclaim that back. Now they have one association with it, from a Miley Cyrus or whoever it is, and it's hard to catch up. It's a literal taking of a form, commodifying, and in this case, denying the opportunity to monetize, grow, have, things. And that's one silly example, but again, multiply that by tens of thousands, and you have the examples of the actual harm that cultural appropriation does, which Americans, in particular because of our historical context, are very tuned to. And so I have one little point left. I know the video is going really long, but that's what I do here on Shelf Stories. My apologies for that. Sorry, not sorry. And that is the issue of Morocco. I do not want to forget that we are talking about an actual country with an actual people and, actual experiences. And they may have different experiences or different residences than I have as an American. I truly try to speak not just from the American context. I use my perspective, but I think there's parts of, speaking for marginalized folks that resonate with folks in other countries. I know a lot of people that are from other countries that are like, yeah, you're onto something. Thank you for helping me think of this stuff. So it tells me I'm not just speaking from the American context. That doesn't, I still have the responsibility to look at, Morocco in particular, and would, that culture or people from that culture respond the way I'm responding and call it, what was done appropriation. I'm going to give this point to Nathaniel Robinson, who definitely, listens to me and agrees much of me, but really pushed back at me saying I didn't really understand or show enough understanding of what Moroccan culture is before flying in with a judgment. My response to that is yes, I would love to learn more. I think it would have been more reassuring to see a cultural partner involved in the project, a front-facing cultural partner, so that exchange, so that exchange is seen, right? Now someone from the culture is benefiting directly. It's not just, here's a game and, otherwise you would never get a game about your city or some kind of line like that. Now, I have a code that someone from the culture has looked at it and said, oh, this is great. And this is my friend. And, we're together. If the picture was, that the person and Stefan Feld, kind of holding or like interchanging, that would have been so much better because it would have been a code to us that says, okay, this isn't that train of appropriation that we're used to. This is something a little bit more mutual. This is appreciative. And we'd be cool with that. I offer that cultural partnerships are the way forward here. And this, I'll end here. This is about, the way forward is about positivity. Cultural partnerships, when it comes to these games that are, from different cultures, should be, I don't understand what the resistance is to that. Why don't we have that as a norm? that obtains all over the place. And people who are going to do, games about different places, don't you want to consult with an expert? Don't you want to consult with somebody who has lived experience? I'm not going to make a Star Wars game without talking to, someone who knows Star Wars back and forward. I'm not going to, make these things that people care about, that people have passion about without consulting. I'm not going to rely on my own expertise. I'm a limited person. As much as I can dive in and get to know, I want to, check for people who love are attached to the thing. I think that should be normalized. And I'm noticing that there's a fear even around that. It's like, well, you're constraining creators. How can a creator be expected to, submit their creation for approval from some, Politburo type experience? The creator should be free to make whatever. This myth of the creator, unbounded just drives me nuts, because that is not the process of creation. A truly creative person should welcome constraints, should welcome collaboration. Obviously, there's a collaboration involved that affirms the agency of the creator, still their thing. The cultural partner is there as a support. And there's plenty of examples. It's happening now. I'm not coming up with anything revolutionary. All I'm saying is that paradigm, which is still struggling to get off the ground, I think that should be adopted, no question, as to, the paradigm of these multicultural games, just to take the images or the issues off the table or mitigate them as much as possible. There's ways where cultural consulting can go badly. They can be like the shield to deflect against criticism. That's not good. Genuine cultural consultation. So that's what I got, peoples. So that is the last that I'll do about appreciation and appropriation. I may do another video just talking about my own cultural journey. I showed a little bit at the beginning, and maybe people are interested in learning a little bit more. That'd be down the road and separate. So please engage. Everybody who engages in good faith, they are I will give them everything I got in terms of response. If you don't engage in good faith, if you're going to attack, if you're going to be nasty or insulting, delete. I got no problem with that. But because I want to keep my YouTube comments as open and as welcoming as possible to as many perspectives as possible. So thank you very much for coming with me along the ride. This is Jason reminding you, if you could change your mind, you could change the world. So until next time, cause some good trouble.